Good evening and welcome to The Report with me, John Rees. Tonight on the programme we'll be discussing the escalation of violence in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula following the beheading of 3 Egyptians by the armed group Supporters of Jerusalem. But first we look at Syria, where Islamic State fighters have raised their flag on the eastern outskirts of the Syrian border town of Kobani. It has raised questions about whether or not the airstrikes can halt the advance of the group. Afsal Ahmed has more on this story.
Despite airstrikes conducted by nearly 40 countries, Islamic State fighters in Iraq and Syria continue their advance, even if at a slower pace. Kurdish military officials fighting near the northern Syrian town of Kobani have expressed that airstrikes are not enough and that a ground component is needed. IS fighters have adapted to airstrikes by leaving their open positions when an enemy jet approaches, scattering and then hiding, only to resume when the planes are gone. They've also limited their radio communications to avoid being detected and mostly travel at night. Kurdish officials say they need heavy weaponry and ammunition to match the capabilities of a far advanced group. Their calls add to the growing skepticism amongst various top figures in the UK and US who have questioned the effectiveness of the tactic. Former British Chief of the Defence Staff, General Sir David Richards, expressed that the current conflict had to be viewed as a conventional military campaign rather than as a counter-terrorist operation. In a video released today, an unnamed IS spokesman mocked Western leaders for using airstrikes, chiding them that if they were real men, they would send ground troops to fight them.
Real men, you will send all your forces down on the ground. You will not bomb us from the skies. You will send them all on the ground, fighting us one by one.
Fighting continues to rage between Kurdish rebels and IS fighters near Kobani, with IS fighters surrounding the town on 3 fronts. Visiting the border, a Kurdish member of the Turkish parliament pleaded for help to save the predominantly Kurdish town.
Tüm uluslararası güçleri, Türkiye demokrasi güçlerini, Türkiye hükümetini Kobane'de verilen bu mücadeleye destek sunmaya, Kobane halkının yanında olmaya davet ediyoruz.
A statement issued by the YPG, the main Kurdish armed group in Syria, vowed never-ending resistance, stating that every street and house will be a grave for them. Islamic State have also taken more territory in Anbar province in neighbouring Iraq in their march to the capital, Baghdad. With arguably marginal effectiveness of airstrikes against Islamic State, who control swathes of territory in Iraq and Syria, has the US and its partners hugely underestimated the group's capabilities. Afsal Ahmed, The Report, Islam Channel.
Well, joining me in the studio to discuss this is Dr. Rebwar Fatah, Director of Middle East Consultancy Services, and Mehiyar Kathem, who's a doctoral candidate at the School of Oriental and African Studies here in London. Welcome to you both. Rebwar, OK, so the Kurds in northern Iraq are being armed by the US and its allies, but not the Kurds who are under most threat in Syria. Why?
I can't really answer that question. I guess there is maybe there's a Turkish element into that, because while Turkey maybe has no problem arming the Kurds of Iraq for the KRG, but they may have problem arming Kurds in Syria, because otherwise, and probably the Turks are, fear of having another Kurdish political entity, whatever that is, somewhere on this planet, which they don't like the look at it.
I mean, some people are suggesting that perhaps what's in the mind of the Turkish government is that they prefer even ISIS to an independent Kurdish entity, which would affect the biggest concentration of Kurds in Turkey itself.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. America, behind the scenes, has implored Turkey to come on its side, and after months of negotiations and months of trying to gather this kind of support that the region needs, the Kurds needs, the Arab needs in north of Iraq and north of Syria, it hasn't been coming because Turkey only is concerned with the Turks, the Turkish issue, and that is to do with the nationalist issue in Turkey. It doesn't really care much about the Kurds. And what we've just seen is a travesty. It's absolutely appalling. Thousands of people are being killed, And Turkey needs to support the Kurds in the north of Syria. It needs to supply them with arms. It needs to supply them with training. It needs to contain this problem before it actually spills over into Turkey.
I mean, it's a remarkable thing, isn't it? Because, of course, the Turkish area in Iraq has become a byword for supplying oil to the Turks, even to the Israelis, whereas the area around Kobani is, most people recognise, a kind of progressive and democratic entity. It's the one thing you'd think you'd want to support in this.
Well, I mean, there are definitely more female fighters in the Kobani than we have in the British Army here. I'm talking about the percentage, the number. I mean, and the Kurds so far shown that they are mild, they are not fundamentalist, and I guess they support. If there's a transition, if there's ever a transition to democracy in Syria, I guess they will be the pillar for that. But I guess there's a Turkish element to that. That's why they've not been supported. I mean, put the politics aside, but for humanitarian reason, there are 160,000 refugees in Turkey from Kobani itself. Because don't forget, about 360 or 400 villages already been occupied by ISIS, despite the bombardment from the sky. So it seems to me the bombardment has probably have a very, very limited effect on the ground. Maybe for the sake of the humanitarian reason for the refugees, the tactic must be changed from all these heavy planes into maybe helicopter gunship or something that can eliminate a tank. Because yesterday, I think Sunday, Islamic State bombed Kobani 80 times. So, and they have tanks, like not one or two. They have dozens of tanks around Kobani. And it seems to me the Allied forces haven't really been effective.
I mean, do you think this calls into question the degree to which the United States and its allies have a plan? I mean, in the previous Gulf War, they definitely had a plan. I mean, we can argue about whether it worked, whether it was a disaster or not, but they had a plan. It scarcely looks like they have one in this case.
Well, I don't think they do have a plan. At the moment, they're trying to exhaust all the military assets in terms of air power. And they are bringing in, especially in Tikrit and around Baghdad, Apache helicopters manned by American soldiers. So we may not have boots on the ground, but we have boots, as they've been saying, in the air. And so this is a plan, alongside with the British plan to actually deploy drones taken from the deployment in Afghanistan into Iraq. And I think this is a positive step, but it's an insufficient one, because on the ground, ISIS dominates, and we have areas like Kobani in Syria and other areas like Tikrit and Fallujah that are attacking the Iraqi army and the non-state security forces, what we call the militia groups. So what we need actually is a comprehensive security plan, and that hasn't been coming yet. Unfortunately, for the Iraqis, they cannot rely, and the Kurds, they cannot rely on America so much, as we've seen, and this is a problem because it's losing confidence of key players in Iraq at a critical time in Iraq's history and its current fight against ISIS.
I mean, well, people have talked about mission creep, but I mean, as Mehiyar was suggesting there with the deployment of Apache helicopters, this mission is not so much creeping as it's in a 100-yard dash, this one. It's moving very quickly. So do you think they will go to boots on the ground? And if they do, won't that reproduce all the problems of last time round?
I think if they are boots on the ground, it will be in a much later stage, not now. I think for the time... I don't think there's any plan. I think the plan is they bomb them. Maybe Libya is like a template for them. They say they bomb them until maybe they eliminate. But there's a big difference between Kobani and Libya, because the opposition were fighting in Libya for a very, very long time, and also they were very heavily armed. But people in Kobani, they are ordinary people mostly, and the best weapon they have a Kalashnikov. What do you do with the Kalashnikov? While Islamic State confiscated all this arm from Mosul and Raqqa in Syria, as we have seen.
Well, do you think Libya is the template? And if it is, it's not looking like a good one, is it?
No, it's not the template, actually. There isn't really a template for what's happening now, and this is unfortunate. we need to go back to Iraq's recent history to understand what's happening. And I think this is key. And I think this is, again, we've missed the point, is that in many ways, it's not just ISIS. These are tribes, Sunni tribes, Arab tribes, and so on and so forth in Syria, but also largely coming out from Al-Anbar, Salah ad-Din, and Mosul, who are frustrated with the sectarian system. So while the US may bomb them from the air, actually on the ground, they assert a presence, a very strong presence, and they're strong sense of having felt marginalized and disenfranchised by the exclusive political pact between the Shia and the Kurds. And this is a problem. We need to open up the political system so we can include
And do you think the bombing pushes those two forces together? Because when you bomb, you're going to hit Sunni villages, you're going to hit Sunni civilians. Rather than a diplomatic process of pulling those elements apart, aren't you pushing them together by the bombing?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I mean, it's twofold. I mean, there has to be some form of bombing because they're attacking minorities, they're attacking the Kurds, they're attacking the Shia, they're attacking innocent people. There are 3,000 women and children, Christian and Yazidi, who have been taken as slaves, sold for $100, even $10, used as sex slaves because they're not Muslim, they're not seen as Muslim, and this is a problem. So, but at the same time, we need to look back at the American surge of 2006 and 2007, where America pumped billions of dollars into the grassroots and helped ensure that Iraq wasn't lost to these groups. These are groups that are remnants of Al-Qaeda, but also very much Ba'athist. And this is why they have this organizational capacity to attack the Kurds and the Shia and also use the resources in Iraq, in Syria itself, in Kobani. These are Ba'athist military tactics, and they've used it very effectively. So what we need now is a political solution, but that hasn't been coming. We need to pump more billions of dollars so we can bring the youth, mostly youth who are attacking, on the side of the Iraqi army, on the Iraqi state, on behalf of the Kurds, the Iraq's key partners. And so it's twofold, and it's a military and also a political. But the political hasn't been coming, and the military has been very weak.
Do you think General Sir David Richards is right in his comments this week? Because there's now a kind of chorus from the sort of right of the political spectrum, the British establishment, saying there's got to be a ground campaign. Essentially, that's their cry.
I cannot see how you can win a war without boots on the ground. I can't see. I mean, for example, in Kobani, maybe they rely on Kurds to fight the Islamic State, but the Kalashnikov is not really very effective, and it seems to me the bombing is not effective either. So you need some sort of movement on the ground, and or maybe you need some sort of a smaller planes like helicopters or whatever it is to fight the Islamic State. But so far in Kobani it has been for about 20 days, more than a couple of weeks, nothing has happened.
Do you think if we did do what General Sir David Richards is saying and treated it like a ground campaign, wouldn't we reproduce the problem the first time around? Because, you know, the last ground campaign created a hell. Out of the hell came ISIS. Now the bombing isn't working, so we go back to creating the hell. Isn't that
this is what ISIS wants? You've just seen that in the report. One of the, I think he's a British citizen who's actually in fighting in Iraq or Syria. I think this is absolutely an appalling situation where we have ground troops on the ground. I think there could be a case where we have limited support. Actually, now what we've had, and we've seen this now, in Tikrit and around Baghdad, we have American airmen in Apache helicopters. So, but the key issue here is that there needs to be a type of army made up of the Sunni tribes, the Kurds, and the Shia, and Baghdad itself. And that hasn't been coming. That is the only way we can have a united force.
OK, well, that's why I'm going to have to stop you, because that's all we've got time for in this part of the programme. But do rejoin us after the break, where we'll be looking at the defeats for Al-Shabaab in Somalia and at the rest of today's news. That's after the break.